Hey, I'm Cor.
I'm Elena, and we're from the Walker Art Center Teen Arts Council. We're going to give you a brief tour of some pieces of art that show representation in a positive and negative light. These are all from the Walker exhibition, 5 Ways In.
The first piece we're going to take you to is called The Diner. It's by an artist named George Segal. As you can see, this piece shows a woman serving coffee to a man. The woman is behind the counter, which places her in a pretty classic position of servitude and obligation to others. Women are often thought of as objects or as something that's only really meant for one spot. We see this piece and many of the pieces around it in this gallery as showing how women are represented as tools for satisfaction and as less than.
This piece also has a lot of everyday objects like coffee and sugar. Being put in an everyday setting further supports a narrative that women are supposed to serve others.
Hi guys.
Hey.
So I had a question. All right, so I was wondering, how does this artist influence this work of art?
That's a great question. The artist who made this piece, George Segal, was a white man, which means he likely didn't have much experience being put in such a position of servitude or objectification.
This also raises the question of whether or not the artist actually matters. You might ask, if the artist was a woman, would it be empowering, or would it still show the same narrative that it does right now? Because not everybody knows who the artist is, and not everybody should have to know who the artist is.
All right, thanks guys. I look forward to the rest of the tour.
All right, let's move on to the next work.
Good catch. Oh, look at that funky painting.
I know, right? So this is Great American Nude number 32 by Tom Wesselman.
Number 32?
Yeah.
And they all have naked women like that?
Yeah, and there's actually 100 in this series.
Wow,
I know.
that's so many. Mm-hmm. And look at all of the objects in it, like the cheesecake on the red table, and the easel that kind of looks like a cross.
Yeah.
And the American flag blanket, and the American flag rug, and the woman who doesn't have any features almost.
Yeah, this piece has a lot of symbolism.
So there's all these symbols, but what do they mean and what do they say about women and American culture?
Good question. So cheesecake represents a piece of art that displays a woman in a sexually pleasing way. So in this piece, you can see that the lady's kind of sprawled out on the bed, which is really interesting because if you look at her, all you can see is her body and her lips. She doesn't have eyes, she doesn't have a nose, so some of her senses are like stripped away from her, which kind of shows that the viewer isn't supposed to focus on like her feelings and what she sees in her life, but rather just what she looks like.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And what's up with that flag and how it's kind of away from her body?
Yeah, so I think it's supposed to be a blanket in this piece, and instead it kind of is around her in a way that frames her body. So if you think about it, a blanket is something that's supposed to cover up an object, but a frame is something that like fully displays it, and its entire job is to like make this object seem more pleasing or to give it a frame.
That's so true.
Yeah.
I think that creates an interesting contrast with how the American flag and American culture is presenting women in such a sexual way.
Exactly. Tom Wesselman is actually very controversial for this series because of all the women that he portrayed naked in all of these paintings. So that ties into the question, does the artist matter? And I think that in this piece, he was really trying to have a meaning with how society views women, but also he's objectifying women in these pieces of art, which is really interesting and ironic.
That's very interesting. And
Yeah.
100 times is a lot.
Let's keep it moving.
Yeah, good idea.
All right, so we continue on with our tour and exploring the theme of representation in 5 Ways In. This time with a sculpture with sort of a non-traditional backstory, especially when it comes to who created it.
So here we have a piece called Fountain by Levine, which was originally made by Marcel Duchamp.
So what Marcel Duchamp did was he took a urinal, he signed it, he laid it on its side and presented it to a juried exhibition. This was sort of the beginning of the ready-made art movement in which artists just took everyday objects, did nothing to them, and presented them as modern art. Duchamp got a lot of attention for this, some noting him as sort of father of modern art and contemporary art, focusing more on meaning behind an object than the actual thing. Sherry Levine took the same exact object but casted it in bronze.
I have a question. So how do you think the meaning of the work changed with the changing of the artists?
I think this piece is pretty loaded and changed. There's the literal representation of one artist worked by another, which in itself is a huge theme, and whether appropriation is art or if Levine was valid in doing this or if it's still Duchamp's piece. But I also think there's a lot of considerations of gender, both in the process and in the object itself. A urinal is sort of an object often representing masculinity, male power, and Levine took this into her own hands and gave it a sort of elegance with this shiny bronze look. And so I think that sort of changes the view of an object that's usually very harsh and masculine to be sort of like sculpture-like. I think there's also the consideration of how women versus men are perceived in art. Duchamp did almost nothing except present a piece, and he got a lot of recognition for it. While women are continually fighting to be recognized in modern art, but in art in general, and Levine did all this work and much more than Duchamp did, but it's very different how she's recognized.
Cool, thanks.
And now let's go on to the next piece.
Hi, today we're going to be talking about Fat Free by David Hammond. That's P-H-A-T free. Fat free is kind of a play on words, especially with what the piece talks about, which is homelessness and the presumptions that we have about homelessness. A lot of people expect homeless people to be skinny or malnourished, like they're not eating, but in fact it's often the opposite, with low budget options being fairly unhealthy. And so things aren't always as they seem. Do you want to talk more about the video itself?
Yeah, so the video is both video and audio. And so the beginning first few minutes is plain black screen. So all you hear is the sound of something that sounds like cans or some sort of metal thing that's going across the street or across the sidewalk. And then it switches into a video part of what is really going on. And so kind of to start with the audio part of it, at first when you hear it, you hear a lot of cans. So we thought initially that it really fit into the stereotype of homelessness in the idea of can collecting or kind of walking across the street and kicking the trash cans or whatever we hear. And so the first idea that we had was this connection to homelessness and how our perception on being on the outside really contributed to the image that we saw, even though there was no image. But then once you switch to the video, it's a different thing, right?
So in the video, there's a man walking around the streets late at night in New York, kicking a big metal trash can on the sidewalks. The video is pretty low quality and it's pretty grainy. It's pretty dark at night. He's wearing all black. And together, the audio and the video create this really surreal experience that neither of them would be able to achieve on their own.
Who's the guy in the video, and how does his identity affect the art?
So the guy in the video is actually the artist, David Hammond, and it's really curious because, as Veronica said, him being in all black really adds to this anonymity or this kind of taken away from the individual, which oftentimes the idea of homelessness can do. We often see homeless people as a population, not really as an individual. So really adding into this fact that there's kind of this loss of personal touch to the piece, and with the artist being the person we're seeing, in reality it's kind of given us this other look into the piece and into his experiences as to why he would choose to place himself or why he would choose to challenge this idea that society has about homelessness.
Thanks for coming on our tour today. I really hope you enjoyed it. What did you think about representation? Did your thoughts change while watching these videos? Let us know.
Make sure to keep up with Walker events, both on the Walker pages as well as at Walker Teens on Instagram. And remember, teens always get in free to the museum, so we hope to see you soon. And
WACTAC out!